But one other thing I told him right away is I said, I don't think you need a full-time person. I
Mm.
think you're delusional like every other company in the amount of data science he needs, and you barely need a half-time person um, because your data is probably dirty. You probably don't have a huge need, and you're following the hype. Let me consult for you on nights and weekends.
From 7 CTOs, my name is Etienne De Bruin, and you're in the CTO studio. Airspace is a company that I've known for a long time. I've known Ryan for a really long time. What I want to know is how the heck did they land someone like you?
But almost 4 years ago now, someone from the company approached me and asked if I'm interested in a job at Airspace, working, like data science, machine learning things. And I turned them down immediately. First of all, I had a job that I liked, and I was not looking to switch. And second of all,
I love how you said immediately.
I
Like,
mean,
I know I've known you for a few months now, and I can just totally
see,
see how you shut them down immediately.
I really did. When you have a job you like, why even explore? But one other thing I told him right away is I said, I don't think you need a full-time person. I
Mm.
think you're delusional like every other company in the amount of data science he needs, and you barely need a half-time person um, because your data is probably dirty. You probably don't have a huge need, and you're following the hype. Let me consult for you on nights and weekends. So that was my response. And I started doing that. And after a few weeks or months, I was like, okay, they need a team. The problems are interesting, and the leadership actually has buy-in and support, and there's tons of data that's unique in its benevolence. What I mean by that is that I was so used to working with personally identifiable data, and that's kind of what most companies are doing. And here is just operational data that has zero ethical dilemmas, and it's cleaner than what I'm used to. And the applications are really, there's a good vision, they're needed, the support is there.
Mm.
So a few months later, I turned in my notice at my previous work and started full-time at Airspace.
Hmm. Now, you said so many things in there that I want to dig into in terms of the ethical stuff, in terms of the delusional stuff.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that ties into, we're talking today about how to introduce AI at your company and how to
mm,
build trust. And I think both of those are somewhat related. I think that many people want to work at a company that does good, or at least doesn't do something evil. It's even more important now with the recent rise of AI. I think the easiest data to generate is following people on their phones or their online activity, which would include a ton of personally identifiable data. The other side of things that's more ethical, has fewer ethical concerns, would be sensors and Internet of Things, but it's less sexy and appealing, and maybe less um, not as good of a ground for groundbreaking machine learning sometimes, in a lot of ways sold. So I think everyone in this field kind of faces ethical dilemma. Do I join a company where I might be um, making a deal with my conscience, or do I find a company that is definitely benevolent? And there's a lot of gray area. What if you are using personal data, but for something good, right? What if you're building something to help people using personal data? And I do like how at Airspace, there's no gray zone. We're using operational data to build something good. We don't use any personal data. Um, Previously in my old line of work where I was closer to personally identifiable data, my nanny told me that I'm working for an antichrist. So, whoa. Just because I described kind of roughly what I do. And one other time when I was at one of I think Ryan's tech talks, you know how he used to have San
Yes,
Diego tech
the
talks before
Carlsbad, yes.
before the pandemic. And he always had that nice session at the end where you either say that you're hiring or you're looking for a job. It was way before I was approached about Airspace when I said, hey, my old company is looking for these types of engineers and this is what we do. And someone started yelling at me for what that company does. And it made me very uncomfortable.
Jeez.
So it's nice that at Airspace you don't have to, and it's just an external. Internally, everyone is processing what they do every day. And
Mm.
I
So
think it's
so
even, go ahead.
what I'm hearing is that, that ethical consideration. And what I'm imagining is that in this pursuit of utilizing AI and creating new ideas, that you could potentially cross into an ethical consideration, even if your company might be sort
Yes.
of on a very, hey, we build, axles for tractors and everything's cool. We just build land equipment. And then when you start saying, well, how can we use AI? Now suddenly you're starting to maybe add components that could cross over the ethical bound. Is that sort of what you're referring to?
When I said that the gray zone, I didn't necessarily refer to that. You can think of something that you might be using that greatly improves the quality of your life, such as personalized search or Gmail inbox or um, even watching Netflix. They have a lot of data on you, and
Mm.
they're using it to build maybe recommendation systems or something that bring a lot of utility to your life, and you might be grateful for that. But they're still using your personal data. Uh, or it could be a tracking app that you agree to. You say, okay, me and my spouse have very complex logistics every day. We're going to share a location with each other so that it's easier to know where we are. But then you're sharing it through a company that uses your personal data, knows where you are at every point, and it kind of becomes a gray area, even though the utility to you is absolutely amazing, and maybe it even increases family safety, especially if you maybe seeing where your child is as well. So I think that kind of is a gray area. In
Mm.
addition to all these companies who monetizing the data, even if it's somewhat anonymized, it could be still an infringement on your privacy.
Yeah, so if I think of what you're saying, especially as our audience is probably CTOs and startups, you may be utilizing the service of a company that might be in that gray zone.
Hmm.
So, you might be saying, I need this location data just so that I know when to show which tractor parts to which person.
Hmm.
And that service that I'm leveraging and then integrating into some recommendation engine could potentially be in that gray zone.
Absolutely. And at Airspace, we look at drivers' locations, but only while they are doing their job. So driving something. In a way, you can say that we're looking at our um, package location. As soon as they're done driving and not interested in any new jobs, we do not store their location.
Yes, but I assume with Airspace, you are vertically integrated there. So you've built your own package
Yeah,
tracking.
exactly. Yeah.
Another startup might say, well, we're going to use a package tracking solution. But then that company, the way they're doing it might be crossing into the unethical zone.
Exactly. When you don't do
So,
it yourself, you rely on someone else who might be monetizing the data or doing something else.
yes. So I think what I'm hearing and which I find interesting is as we're looking at integrating more AI into our organizations or leveraging existing tools, that there is an ethical consideration there. We should have an ethical consideration.
Yeah.
I think that's
And then it
amazing.
goes deeper too, because everyone has heard of the bias, AI bias, whether I always think of, I used to be on Zoom a lot before the pandemic when it was earlier stages. And I noticed something interesting. I would here people, I have an accent, so I figured it will always be suppressing me. It was definitely not trained on voices like mine. But interestingly, I noticed that in a meeting, I would hear standard American accent males really loud and clear, but females talking in, still standard American accent would be suppressed. And my theory, and I don't know, and it definitely doesn't happen now. Zoom has very good quality today, is that the engineers who trained it use their own voices
Mm,
to do the digital
mm,
amplification of the voice and suppression of the noise. So then everything around them, maybe someone talking about coffee or whatnot, turned into noise. So they're literally
hmm.
suppressing voices that don't sound like that. Again, that's been addressed and fixed, but there's a lot of bias like that in AI. The data you train on uh, informs the model, and the data's biased, your model's
Yeah.
biased.
So again, as you adopt AI services integrated into your company, consider that the models have biases in them.
Absolutely. And I think even before building the models, it's important to think about what biases might be in my data,
Mm,
right? And it doesn't have to be necessarily unethical bias, right? You might not struggle with the ethical aspect of that. But at Airspace, for example, if we're building um, a model that predict how long one of the drivers will spend on location to know if they're going to make the flight, maybe we inadvertently introduced a bias that certain type of drivers' data is captured better than the other. So maybe we're just biasing that some type of drivers, maybe in certain locations or maybe at certain time of day, appear to take longer just because that data is biased. And I don't
mm.
think it's an ethical issue, but then it's a systematic
Yes,
bias in your
yes.
system that's hurting the outcome of your model. So it
Yeah,
doesn't even
I
have to
think
be
what
ethical.
yes, and so I think what this is raising the awareness for me on is perhaps when we were integrating with APIs and services where it's more of a transactional, extract the data, do something with it just in its raw form. That's one thing, but and it didn't require perhaps a uh, diving into how the data was actually, created. Whereas with AI, now we as CTOs have to take a look at, okay, whatever system or service you're integrating with, there's the ethical question, there's the bias question. There's that requires more due diligence from us to take a look at the service providers or the APIs for those types of pitfalls.
And I think that you always have a choice with anything, but specifically machine learning, rely on third party, which in many ways could be easier, faster, or do something yourself, which could be more bespoke to what you need, but then will take much longer. If you trust yourself, you can definitely consider every possible bias in the data that you're using or in the way you're building the model. When you are trusting third party, you just have to trust that they took care of it. And I think those are good questions to ask when you're doing a POC of company that you might be integrating with, whether buying their data to use or maybe using their model or fully relying on them, is to have an honest conversation about biases that might be affecting the model. And if they say, oh, we have none, that's a red flag, I think. Because I'd rather hear someone who discloses all potential biases and really thought
Mm,
through that than a
mm,
blanket statement. If you think of scientific papers, they disclose potential confounders and also conflicts of interest. And you always want to see that. Same with the company you're integrating with, because this machine learning is so prone to biases. I would love to hear if I'm integrating with someone, did they think through what are they? Maybe the biases that they might have are irrelevant to me and I'm good with
mm.
that. Or maybe something is a deal breaker and we can have a conversation on how they can address that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think putting myself in the shoes of the company that is selling access or metered usage to their APIs to make AI available, I could see maybe a defensive posture that says, no, our data is not biased because they're trying to sort of defend the quality of their service, when in fact, the quality of the service could be established by disclosing bias.
And also, they might have even considered that, and for their use cases, it might not be biased. Imagine again Zoom Circuit 2018. If they're creating teleconference software for male engineers, and it's very, very small company, maybe that was fine, right? And they never considered that. And again, that
Mm.
is my crazy theory, because I've noticed that I couldn't hear any women. And when I fly to San Francisco, I hear them loud and clear. They're not soft spoken. They have normal accents. So my bias that it was a depression.
Let's talk. Let's end this episode with the talk, the little thing you dropped there about the delusion that companies might have in dedicated full-time data science
Yeah.
departments. Talk to me about that delusion.
I've seen it many times at companies that I've either worked myself or partnered with, or had friends work at that. Sometimes people say, oh, I have so much data, I need a data scientist. But unless they have a use case or a need, that's just someone who's typically highly compensated and might build amazing stuff that you'll never end up using because you never needed that. Um, Another thing where I find companies delusional is that they don't understand that they don't need to start with a data scientist. They need data engineers or someone who will build the infrastructure to later bring on someone who will build on top of that. Another delusion is, especially from the leadership, is thinking, okay, I'm going to hire this data scientist. I'm golden. I'll have AI at my company. Where if you've never had machine learning at your company and you bring someone on, you need to give your full support to them and actually manage the change that will happen for the entire company. Because once you go through this intelligence transformation, how I call it, a lot of things are going to change, and
Mm.
it will require educating people, building trust, changing your workflows. We've seen it many times where a manual process or traditional process would have a 10% failure rate, and it's accepted. People do it that way. You introduce an automated system based on machine learning that has 5% failure rate. And it sounds like a crazy success, right? You just half the failure rate. But people are so reluctant to accept that, especially if it happens to different types of errors. Like, oh, I would have never erred here. Why do we need that? And they hold those
Mm.
5% against your AI system without even acknowledging that, well, we actually the baseline is 10%. Um, so you need the leadership to emphasize that we're building AI to automate things, make them faster, make certain things that were previously impossible possible, and support trust in the company that this is the right thing to do and we need to use it correctly. I've seen also a million models built and be perfectly great from the model perspective, then being misused in the company,
Mm.
misunderstood, and actually hurting the company instead of helping, even though it's a perfectly great model.
That is a very interesting visualization. I can see people hunched over a monitor and trying out the model and then seeing some really dumb mistake that the model makes, and that damage could be far greater in the overall trust of the model than if you're doing something empirically or line by line.
Absolutely. Or maybe not understanding exactly what the model is predicting. Even a slight misunderstanding would lead you to uh, expecting something else, then being disappointed. And it's a very hard thing to explain your business partners in the company to what a model does if they don't have a technical background, and maybe even feel a little bit threatened, or well, will the model come and take my job, or just people don't trust new things, don't trust technology. So unfortunately, I think most people who are in data science, in machine learning or AI, feel burned out, not because they work crazy hours or anything like that. It's because what they build that they're excited about is not being used properly. So they
Mm.
feel like they're not doing their job in a way that will empower them. And I think it's actually trying something and not building a model because there's no predictive power in the data or something like that is upsetting, but at least you tried and you know that this is a no-go and you move on to something else. Building something amazing and then not having it used to its full potential, I think is way more demotivating. And I've seen it
Yes.
in my reports, I've seen it
Wow.
myself and in my peers.
That is something I have not at all considered. Just, briefly, the comment you made about the delusion around hiring a data scientist when you haven't even laid down the foundations with data engineers. What do you say? I mean, don't you need the data scientist to even know what kind of data you need
Yeah,
or
I
need to
think that this
excavate?
is a very good comment because kind of it's a chicken and egg problem. Who comes first? And I always recommend hire someone who is both, or they call them generalist, or hire a consultant for a short period of time to understand where you are. I don't think it's a
Mm,
CTO's job, for example, to really know and establish that. But if you bring someone whose skill is to build models and they don't have good data to deal with, and maybe they're much slower at parsing the data, and if they can be parsing it manually with suboptimal data flows, you're not going to have models anytime soon. If you have the resources, hiring them together is a perfect pair. But
mm,
sometimes you can find someone who is kind of good enough at both to put the foundation there, or even someone part-time to work with you, the business stakeholder. I consider CTO is someone who represents the business, um, to understand what you have, what you might need to start logging, what type of data you might want to acquire, and create a vision. If you start logging something today, you won't be able to build a model until you have accumulated at least some amount
yeah.
of data, and that's weeks or months or
The thing that you really blew my mind with was this issue of trusting the models or trusting the process or trusting like you said, even with a 5% error rate, it could have a massive impact on everybody's doom and gloom around, oh, the AI models are broken. So this idea of organizational trust in AI was a real eye opener for me.
I think that it is one of the biggest blockers now, especially since we have so much data, computational power, and brilliant minds, but we just might not have the trust. And very human. And I think there are two sides of it. One side is not understanding what it is. And if you have been in an industry for a long time, you really trust yourself. And you cannot imagine a model or maybe someone who graduated 2 years ago with a computer science degree knowing more about your field than you after 30 years. And another one is more of a fear, where probably also coming from not understanding exactly what's happening, but maybe you're concerned for your job. Maybe you build a 30-year-long career and now you're afraid that a model will replace everything you do. But I think that the role of a leader is to frame it as your job becomes more interesting
Mm,
then because you'll be handling exception and your 30-year experiences are very needed, but now you can stop doing easy tasks and start focusing on something that is truly unique. And those people will advance who will build a relationship and utilize AI and not try to um, fight against it, because I don't think that is a battle you can win.
yeah, I think as I focus on the organization that doesn't have any data engineering, doesn't really is using their data in a very sort of transactional, one directional way. perhaps doesn't have that much data, uh, and but has a CTO that is building out the infrastructure. Where does someone like that start without being delusional?
I think that a start is to really know what you want to use AI for. Bad reasons to use AI is because you just have this intellectual curiosity, which is great to have, but it's not a good enough reason to start using AI, or because you feel like you're missing out on something that's developing rapidly. Until you know what you're using it for, um, you shouldn't you shouldn't start, because you need to have a very well defined goal. And I think having a conversation with someone would be very helpful. Even recently, I was having conversations with people who are not very technical, but are leaders of their organizations considering AI. And I had two conversations with the opposite outcomes, where one time we talked things through, and the person was like, okay, yeah, you confirmed everything I thought. I really now think this is a great use case and we're doing everything right. I'm gonna go on with this introduction of AI to my team. With the other person's like, okay, now I understand that I was way too premature, and actually simpler things would work, and I don't have a need for AI, but I'm gonna keep my eyes open. But what I thought I would need it for is actually not something I do need it for, and I don't have a really well-defined idea. So for now, I will stop exploring that. And both conversations I felt were very nice, because I felt helpful, and it seemed that it's sometimes when you're talking to someone, you can lay out a structure and realize whether there is something or not.
Yeah, I think that is in my mind. I'm just seeing office hours or coffee dates, just someone like yourself talking to a bunch of CTOs and just conversationally exploring what can and can't be done, or what should or shouldn't be done. I see a chicken and the egg problem again, which is, how do I, as CTO, present the advantages of mining my data? How do I know if I have enough data? How do I know whether I should be programming or whether I should be training? It just seems like we're moving from, given 50,000 documents, how can I draw up the best practice document? It seems like you can either code that by sections and
Mhm.
sort of just do coding, or you can say, no, wait, that's actually a model that needs to be trained. I feel like there's a bit of a great divide there in my brain, at least.
There probably is. I think that when you have a specific problem, you can um, ask yourself questions. In your example, you have documents representing uh, patterns, and how can you create the best practice document. You can ask yourself, do you already know what the best practice document is, and can you um, in lay out a brief summary suggesting what is the best practice? You don't need AI if you already know. If there's someone who can do that, um, 50 sounds very little to jump into using AI to me. But again, if those are very long documents, are very complex documents, that maybe 50 is enough. But I think that,
You're saying 50,000 doesn't
oh, so you
sound
said
enough.
50,000. Sorry, I thought you said 50. Okay, well,
Oh, oh, oh.
50,000 is definitely more than enough to start,
Okay.
for sure. Um, I think, and I'm a big proponent of um, starting very small, almost as a as the toy prototype. What I like about Ryan Rusnick is that he always has a crazy project that he does at night, um, just to try something out. He prototypes something, uh, and what happens next? He shows it to us, and we're like, "Oh, this is pretty horrible." But he put a start. He proved that something works. We take over and we make it better. But I think this is an awesome quality of him, and there are people who do that a lot. You don't have to build a productionable solution. You can spend a couple weeks trying things out, and then you'll see a trend, whether something is manifesting out of it, or you just waste a lot of time and nothing happens. But it's still a few weeks, and someone who is scrappy and likes to play around with things, and that goes a long way. So you need a small, maybe not at all perfect project to start that momentum going. And from that, someone who is more skilled than that can come in, take it over, and make it better. But I think it's all about trying. If you're not sure, try.
Mm.
And I think now is much better time to do it because there's so many um, automated AI tools that don't even require a ton of technical knowledge, where you are not sitting and building, coding a neural net from scratch, right? You can just play things around. And if someone very talented and scrappy spends 2 weeks and nothing comes out of it, there's probably very little promise unless they're missing something obvious. But if you see, okay, I'm getting somewhere, let's see what happens if I give it to someone who is doing it for a living. It still might not pan out, but I think it's a good start.
Well, I love what you said, because what you're saying is, in this current day and age, there are so many services and tools that can allow for that type of prototyping. Even if there is bias, or even if it isn't fully fleshed out, I mean, for the prototype, it doesn't have to be vertically integrated or perfect. At least you can say, hey, I tried this out with whatever services Azure or AWS
Hmm.
gave me, or some rinky dink AI startup. But at least this all helps then with the communication layer, that, from everything I'm getting from you, this part is so critical. I mean, it's a systemic change that we're trying to instigate inside of existing companies, large and small, to think differently about what can be done with data. And it sounds like, instead of having a production mindset with all these toolings, to use that to prototype, be a Ryan about it, and just get it out. And
And I have
then,
2 points to make here. I think bigger and more successful companies that utilize AI have completely different teams. A prototyping team, they're scrappy. They're not measured on something being productionalized. They're measuring on getting new ideas, new models, and failing a lot, right? They expect it to fail a lot. The next team who takes it over is maybe machine learning engineers who
mm,
are now bringing it to production. And maybe they're the ones who are making it actually usable, or before that, it wouldn't have been much benefit, but the idea is there's a kind of an ideation prototype team
mm,
versus a production team. But what's missing a lot, because both groups of people are very smart, and then, I'm sure there are other layers downstream with engineering support, and then maybe UI and design, how it goes into your product. But what's missing a lot is someone who communicates, and you touched on that. It's just so important. And unfortunately, on average, and to make a very big generalization, people who are drawn to do data science work or machine learning work don't tend to be drawn to talking to a lot of others, communicate, be flexible, saying, okay, let me violate everything I learned in my PhD and say this. And those are almost two different skill sets.
I
And I
love it.
think it's still up in the open. How do you marry them? Do you hire someone separate? Do you find unicorns who are good at both? And
I'm laughing because this is the eternal dilemma of the role of CTO as well, especially in smaller companies. You know, this uh, conundrum of technology innovation and drive and product, versus the, hey, I've got this whole company, this whole sales and marketing machine, this whole leadership, this whole financial construct that needs to understand where I'm going and why. And it's like, oh, well, I'm either gonna do the tech stuff, or I'm also gonna communicate backwards. And this is why it's so important for me at 7 CTOs, that we are training and being made aware of the role of that type of communication back to the organization.
I think
Is
that that's a type of a job. At least right now, I cannot think how AI can steal it, because you have to
Yeah,
communicate a
yeah,
whole bunch more now, and to be really skilled at that, you have to also be very technical. So I'm
yeah.
loving that your organization is um, training people who are
Is
technically great and then leave another skill development.
this is essentially what your role is then, director, manager,
Right now, it
marrying.
is really much so. I code much less now than I did even 2 years ago. And a lot of times is what I do is go back to my team who hears about, well, this model needs to be of this accuracy, to then a team that uses the model who only has a business background or sales background, and talking to them and then really working my brain on how to translate between the
Mm,
two and
mm,
making sure that my team is motivated, because again, there's nothing more demotivating than your model that is not being used. But then when they're not using the model, a lot of times it's not because they're stupid or evil. It's because they're just complex, and there are always reasons for things not to go as planned. And it's not because someone means poorly, it's because they really want to increase revenue and they're using it in whichever way is currently best for them to sell the most to keep the customers happy.
is
So I
the
do feel like a liaison a lot.
yeah. You mentioned this before, and I think this is a good point for us to just maybe sit on, which is this investment that you make to actually build the model. And let's say you overcome all the hurdles, the engineering hurdle, the sciencey hurdle, the bias, the ethics hurdle, the error rate hurdle. You finally get to a point where the model exists. You've trained it, it's ready to be used. And you're saying people don't use it?
A lot of times they don't use it, they misuse it, because you can have someone whose job is to build the model feel like their job is done when the model is ready.
Mm,
But then I feel like it's almost more effort to have it be used and be used properly, the way it was designed, the way it's optimal. Because even if it is used, if it's not communicated well enough, or people have their own,
mm. Yeah, it's hard. This stuff is hard.
it is very hard. And I think that it is even more hard than regular engineered features because it's so hard to explain. And I've noticed the more you explain, the more people feel like they get it, the least they get it because they stop trying to get it. I don't know if that even makes sense.
Total sense.
They just, oh, okay, I got it. And then they go on and tell everyone something that's completely false. And they feel so confident because they kind of got it. But sitting down and saying, no, it's actually more complex and this is not being directly considered and this is that, is impossible. You can't go to 100 people at a company and explain that, and most people would just get overwhelmed. And I've been getting feedback that multiple companies, that teams like mine, we intimidate because like, oh, well, you're so smart. I don't want to burden you and I don't want to appear stupid. Such we work extra hard to be approachable, to encourage questions. At some point, we had office hours. We tried to give presentations and talks and meeting a lot with other people. So, which seems not very technical work, but it's very important.
Yeah, that intimidating part is interesting to me. But even as we're if even as you're talking about the training of the model, and then the complexity of actually using the model. I think about it in terms of I'll distill this down to code being written. I think it's conceptually easier for a non-technical person, i.e., CEO, C-suite, to say, I'm going to employ people and they're going to write me code, and the code is going to be executed. And there's a layer of QA in there to make sure that the code runs well.
Yeah.
Move on to AI. I'm going to employ people who are going to train a model which is going to produce nodes and weights, and that's basically what it's building the thing that's supposed to do the thing. And now I have to put my situational data onto it to have the neural network predict or respond a certain way. I just think that the human brain, it's very hard for people to understand that what they've employed people to do hasn't actually created the thing. but it's gonna create the thing that's going to create the thing.
Yeah, I think, and you don't have to go neural network deep learning. I can give you an example. So we have a suite of models that predict an outcome of an order. And I would be talking to someone, again, on the business or product side about the model. And I would ask, what's your level of understanding of how AI and machine learning work? And they said, like, I'm very familiar. I'm not technical, but I love to read in my free time. I really understand that. And then later they would say something like, I know your model predicts an outcome of certain things. Can you please tell the model that on Tuesday it's 5 p.m. in Houston something takes longer? And I was like, no, you just told me that you have a stellar understanding of machine learning. Give me the data that shows that, and model will learn from that. And if it's not in the data, no, I cannot add an if statement into a machine learning model. It's exactly the opposite of how it works. So sometimes people feel like they really know how machine learning works, but they still so used to thinking of if then engineering at this condition that they
Mm,
just can't move away and take that final leap to
mm.
understand it's all about the data. Surely we can say, oh, it is in the data. Our model is not learning from that. A different conversation. But if it's not in the data, we can't make a model learn something that's not in the data.
That is so, and I mean, I think that hits the nail on the head for this misunderstanding in the industry. And I think it's critical for CTOs in which these organizations do not yet exist to open the door and to open the door to understanding that this is what AI or machine learning produces. Produces the thing that is supposed to produce the thing. I think a lot of non-technical people understand the conditional if then this. And
Mhm.
and and I think for them it's just that is what code is. It's a bunch of conditionals.
And that's what people learn even in middle elementary school in their simple, coding classes, even if they took it once, or if they took a bunch in college. That is programming how we know it. Um, Even people who just use Excel, conditional formatting, so
Yeah.
easy.
I think it's just coding is just too close. It's the heuristics of I know how to put a formula in an Excel spreadsheet. Apps are just amazing spreadsheets, so coding must just be that. And to a degree, coding is just that. But the whole AI revolution, where you instead of programming, you're training, I think is going to be a massive paradigm shift that I think maybe is reserved for the next generation.
And I'm hoping they'll start teaching about it in school. When my kid was in preschool, they had this month where parents would come in and explain what they do. My husband's geologist. It was very easy. He brought in rocks. Everyone was excited. I came in and I confused kids so much. I have a Medium article written about it, how to explain data science to preschoolers. I tried my best. At the end, one girl shout out, "But my mom sells houses." I truly did not learn the biggest, despite my biggest attempt.
Wow. Wow. Well, Ksenia, this was very interesting. I can see you leading the evangelism of what this is going to be for our industry, and I'd love to have you do this more and more with our CTOs at least.
I would love to do that because I think that by being that liaison long enough now and understanding how AI works well, but also having been around business and understanding the business needs, I've developed the right muscles, but I'd like to train them more. And I think
Mm.
having those conversations, understanding different use cases and frustrations is how you train that muscle.